NBC4, this is News Conference with Conan Nolan.
On this edition of News Conference, as part of NBC's Education Nation endeavor, we take a look at two of the mainstays of California's commitment to higher education. With budgets about to be slashed again, what's to become of California's state university system, its 23 campuses and 412,000 students? And what's to happen to its community colleges, 112 campuses, 2.9 million students? We talk with Community College Chancellor Jack Scott and CSU Chancellor Charles Reed.
Good evening and welcome to News Conference. With us, the Honorable Charles Reed, Chancellor of the California State University System, and the Honorable Jack Scott, Chancellor of the California Community College System. Both, well, the largest systems of their kind in the world, frankly. Chancellor Scott, to you first. Based on the governor's budget, assuming that tax hike extensions will stay in effect to vehicle license fees, income and sales tax, what are you already cutting out of your budget?
We will take a 5% cut, and that includes a rise in tuition offsetting the $400 million cut, which makes $290 million cut, but that would be 5%, and we will simply have to turn away more and more students. We turned away 140,000 last year.
You can live with that.
Well, we'll try to live with it. I don't think we have much choice.
That's the good scenario,
yeah, that's
though.
the best case scenario.
Now, if these tax hike extensions do not continue, they expire June 30th, what happens to your budget then?
We think it will be somewhere around 10% cut. We think we'll turn away 400,000 students.
You're going to close campuses? Would that happen?
No. Perhaps we should to, make dramatic what's happening, but what will happen is each campus will educate fewer and fewer students. We'll simply cut about 10% of our course sections, which means that when those course sections are full, and by the way, by the time registration is over, about 98% of our classes are completely filled. And so when somebody walks up or tries to get in, often they don't get in, and in some cases, maybe they get to take 2 classes instead of 4 that they wanted to take.
You furlough teachers or just pink slip them?
Well, we have a large number of part-time teachers, and we just don't use part-time teachers anymore. And we have had furloughs. We have, for instance, in my office, we're right now operating with a furlough of 1 day a month.
Chancellor Reed, largest state university system in the world. Again, same question. Based on the governor's budget today, assuming the tax hike extensions stay in effect, what are you looking at?
We're looking at a $500 million cut, which is 18% of the general funds from the state declining. It will take our budget back to the year 2000 in dollars, but we will have 70,000 more students to educate with the money that we're going to have. Now, we have worked very hard since December to figure out how the 23 campuses in the Chancellor's office can cut the $500 million out of our budget. We are going to have a 10% tuition increase starting in September.
Now, let's assume the tax hike extensions aren't extended, and you lose that revenue as of June 30th. Then what happens?
That's what we have referred to as an all-cuts budget. And the governor has said very clearly to us, if there's an all-cuts budget, you can assume that you're going to have to take another $500 million cut, which would be a $1 billion reduction in our operating budget. That would be a 36% cut of our operating budget. I don't know of any business in this state that can take a 36% cut in its budget in 1 year.
What does it mean?
Well, it's the equivalent of us closing 10 of our smallest campuses, or it would be the equivalent of turning away 85,000 of our students.
Faculty layoffs?
There will be fewer faculty. We won't replace faculty that are retiring or leaving. The part-time faculty that Jack talked about, we won't bring back. So we'll have to give some layoff notices, not just to faculty, but also to staff.
Now, have you figured this out yet, or are you still playing with the numbers and trying to figure out how to achieve those savings if indeed you don't get that tax revenue?
We have figured out the first $500 million. And earlier this week, or last week, we had a board meeting, and I shared with the board meeting that we had to be prepared for the second $500 million cut. And if that happened, I was going to ask the board in July to increase tuition up to 32% so that we would have that revenue coming in to help cover part of that cut. That 32% would cover $400 million of the $500 million, but we would still have to cut another $100 million out of the campuses.
Chancellor Scott, do you have the option of charging tuition to your students?
Well, certainly we do charge tuition. In fact, the governor in his first round has indicated that our tuition will go up by $10 more a unit. We don't set the tuition. That's set by the legislature. We're a little different system. As you know, the community colleges are rather decentralized, and so the cuts I'm talking about won't be ordered from the central office. They'll be taken campus by campus. We have 72 community college districts and 112 colleges. And what they tend to do when they get their budgets cut is they reduce the number of courses that they offer. That's the quickest way for them to reduce the budget. But they make other cuts. Very much as Chancellor Reed just pointed out, we have resignations and retirements of faculty that we don't replace. Our administrative staff, for instance, we looked at the figures the other day, and in this year alone, they went down by 5.65%. So we're reducing staff at every place that we can.
Describe the student at a community college in California. Who will be impacted? Who is this person?
Well, the ones that we're most fearful of impacting are two groups. One, the transfer student, the individual who perhaps can't get in CSU or UC, but is seeking to get a bachelor's degree and shows up, and they're a first-time student often, and because of registration priority, they tend to be the ones toward the end of the line. So those are the ones that we're going to lose. Also, the people that are out of work. This recession has taken away jobs from people. And in many cases, these people, those jobs aren't going to come back. So they need to come to us for retraining. As you know, we have 175 different career technical programs where we retrain people in healthcare programs such as nursing, radiological technology. We train electricians, we train auto mechanics. We have a tremendous number of career technical programs. And these people are coming back to us and they're desperate in order to get retraining. So those are the kinds of students. And then, of course, we take the upper 100%, as I sometimes say. And so we have students who come to us who need basic skills, who perhaps don't have the kind of English and math training that they ought to have, and we need to provide them with remedial education so that they can go on and succeed in college.
Chancellor Reed, your student.
The students that I think will suffer the most will be community college transfer students. In 2009-10, I slammed the door on transfer students and didn't take any that winter. We would probably do the same thing this year, and we would anticipate that we would reduce our enrollment by about 20,000 students. That's not fair, but I don't know what else we can do in January. We can't do anything this fall. We have already given notice to all those students about admission, and we've got to provide all the courses that we possibly can for those students.
We're talking about California's commitment to higher education in the great state of California. We'll be talking more with the chancellors of the California State University system and the community college system. That when News Conference returns. Two high-ranking gentlemen in higher education in California, the Honorable Charles Reed, Chancellor of the California State University system, and Jack Scott, Chancellor of the California Community College system. Chancellor Reed, is there a disconnect between the public who pays the bills and your institution?
I would say that parents are outraged, especially parents whose children can't get into college. On the general public, I don't think they really understand the consequences of not funding higher education, because that's what has made California great. That's what's made jobs in California. That's what's made California's economy. That's what's made California a world-class economy, is higher education. The community colleges, CSU, and UC. And that's what is about to be devastated.
But what for them to say, listen, this is still a very good buy if you compare it to all the other systems in the country. Party's over. We're going to have people just pay more for we can't afford it anymore.
Well, in the California State University, 64% of our students are students of color. About 200,000 of the 450,000 students are very needy students. We have the highest number of Pell students in the United States.
Those are Pell Grants.
They are the most needy students. They get $5,550 a year to pay for their college. And we have more of those students than anybody else in the United States. So we have a lot of very needy students in the CSU.
In the Chancellor for the community college system, are you doing enough to tap in alternative sources of revenue? Do you have an alumni base? Do you have a relationship with private industry? Say, we're training your mechanics, or do you have a problem being just a two-year institution that hands people off to the State University or the UC system?
Well, I think you've put your finger on several problems that we have, and we are encouraging our community colleges to be more aggressive in terms of fundraising. People do tend, if they move from our institution to a four-year institution, to consider themselves the alumni of the university from which they graduated rather than an alumni of the particular community college. But we're tapping into that. We're getting large gifts that are coming particularly for scholarships. And I want to tie into what Chancellor Reed just said about the student and their needs. We have low-income students, as you would imagine, because of the fact that they're the ones who have to work often. They're the ones who need to stay at home, who can't afford to go away. If we don't educate these individuals, we're going to pay a much higher price in the future to have an uneducated populace. The recent study by the Public Policy Institute said that by 2025, California will need 1 million more college graduates than they're destined right now to produce. 41% of the jobs at that time will need a college degree, and at the rate we're going, only 35% of our population will have that. So we are really doing great damage to our future because, you see, college education is an investment. For every dollar that's invested in it, the state's going to get $3 back in return just in terms of taxes that are paid. So this is something that we've got to alert the state to, that this higher education system, which has been so central to the future of California and to its economy, is beginning to be atrophied. It's cut by cut by cut. I sometimes say, you know, death by 1,000 cuts. And it's an erosion that's terrible.
Conan, for the California State University, we raise privately about $300 million a year. But what is the foundation for all of our campuses is the state general fund. That's what funds the faculty, the classrooms, the cost to educate those students. The $300 million that we get is mostly earmarked, probably 90% of it is earmarked for scholarships or professorships or whatever. And when people give you the money, they want to say how they want it used. And so that's not going to make all that much difference. But our presidents work every day trying to raise money so that they can give more scholarships and provide more service on their campuses. For instance, Cal Poly Pomona, just in the last few months, received $30 million from the Kellogg Foundation, who has supported that institution for the whole time that it's been there. And that's a very nice gift.
But still, some would suggest that the University of California is taking a look at a two-tier system of tuition for UCLA and Cal and the rest of the system. Why don't you consider that for CSU?
I don't think that's a good idea. It's not even a good idea for UC, I'll say that.
Why is that? It's a market-based idea, is it not?
Because the system has unity now, and I want the CSU to have unity among all of its institutions. I have to help the smaller institutions in the CSU with their operating budget. The big institutions help give some of the money that they have to the smaller institutions because of the fixed costs to operate the small campuses.
You get your money out of the general fund. Prop 98 passed years ago, which is a funding revenue for K through 14, K through 12, and community college. That sections off money out of the general fund. Do you contemplate your own revenue source, going to the ballot with your own system so that you section out your own money the way everybody else seems to?
Well, Mark Udoff and I have talked about that at different times. I think if you read the Economist article from 2 weeks ago, it's very clear that that's what is the big problem in California, is everybody has earmarked all the money. I think that the legislators only have about 15% of discretion on how they can spend their money. So, you know, why do we want to be part of the problem? On the other hand, maybe we need to do something if the revenue picture is not going to get better down the road.
We're talking about higher education in California, the CSU and community college system. We'll have a few more questions when News Conference returns. Talking about higher education in California and the crisis that we are seeing right now. Chancellor Reed, there's a bill through the legislature that's headed through the legislature, similar to one that was vetoed twice by Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, that would open up the foundations affiliated with each of your 23 campuses. Foundations that provide revenue sources and private money for each campus. Require them to have all their records public. You've opposed that in the past. Are you still opposing this bill?
We will oppose the bill unless it's amended, and we have offered...
Why are you opposing it?
Well, we want to protect the confidentiality of the donors if they don't want that information made public. We also want to protect our contracts and private information that we have with companies like Coca-Cola, IBM, those kinds of contracts.
Why is it you want to protect? What's important about keeping those private?
Well, you know, they provide us revenue, and you know, if they can see each other's secrets that they have, then they'll lower the revenue that they provide us.
And Chancellor Scott, do you have a dog in this fight at all on that Leland Yee bill?
Well, there were some corrections that were made in the bill last year that made it easier for our foundations to operate. We weren't interested in the anonymity of the donors. We thought that had some value, that if somebody wants to be anonymous, they ought to have a right to remain anonymous. But we don't have quite the issues that CSU has.
Right, but you're a former member of the California legislature.
I certainly am.
Former chair of the Senate Education Committee. Is there a disconnect, do you see, between the legislative body and the needs of higher education? You see CSU and the community college district.
Well, I think often the legislature doesn't fully understand the tremendous contribution and the importance of higher education. And I served as chair of the Education Committee, and you can imagine that was a point that I made very frequently. In fact, I introduced a funding bill for the California community colleges. I introduced other bills that had to do with higher education, both CSU and UC. So I think they've got to understand. They come from different walks of life, and some of them do not fully understand exactly the fact of what's happening in higher education and the attrition and the reduction of the resources and how that's going to impact the economy of the state of California.
Do you see, Chancellor Reed, a problem in the public's perception of government? And that is, they lump you and your institutions with the penal institutions, that is incarceration, with you know, K through 12, with Caltrans, the DMV, the rest of it. They say, listen, state government is bloated, it's too big, they spend too much money, we're sorry, but you guys have to be more efficient.
Well, that's true. On the other hand, I think that students are getting it, parents are getting it, how important it is that they can get a higher education. Is what Jack said earlier. The difference between a student that graduates from high school and graduates from a university graduate will make $2 million in their lifetime. Somebody that graduates from high school, about $750,000. Now, that is a lifetime experience that we want students to know about.
Now, currently, the Democratic leadership and the governor says there are 2 Republicans in the Assembly, 2 in the state Senate they need. Are you going into their districts and saying, we're going to close this Cal State San Marcos if you don't?
I haven't gone in their district and threatened anybody, but I've gone into districts, and our presidents have gone into districts and been a part of hearings to explain the consequences of not funding higher education.
Are they listening?
And I think they are. How many students will have to turn away? How many people that will have to lay off? I think people are starting to get that.
Chancellor,
they're listening
the
in
last
the fact
word here.
That, well, all I can tell you is that the most recent polls say that the public wants to vote on this. Right now, it's being blocked in the legislature, and the public is saying about 60% of the public thinks that they ought to have the right to look at these tax extensions and vote on whether or not they would be willing to continue these taxes in order to help K through 12 education, in order to help infrastructure, and in order to help higher education.
The Honorable Jack Scott, Chancellor of the California Community College System, thank you very much for joining us. Dr. Charles Reed of the California State University System, thank you very much for joining us. We'll have some final comments after this. This interview is on the internet. You can pass it on to your friends. Go to www.nbcla.com/news conference, one word. And if you're on Facebook, go to my page, Conan NBCLA, and add your comments about the program. Thanks for joining us. See you next Sunday.